depending on where we are, I think our culture, our society, our faith constructs, all of that can make it harder for us to really face the inevitable.
Have you ever seen someone living an amazing life and thought to yourself, how'd they get so lucky? If you are not currently living a life that's on your terms, a life by your design, then this podcast series is for you. This is the More Confidence with Luna Guy podcast. And in this special season, I'm going to be interviewing people who are living a life by design, living a life on their terms. And I'm going to find out once and for all if it is just luck or there's something more going on. Let's dive in. Yvonne, you have written 2 books. And in those 2 books, you talk about, certainly in the most recently one, you talk about a topic that most people never want to talk about. What's been your experience of talking about, well, death?
Looking back, it was all around me. In my early 30s, I could count 17 deaths. I quit counting. I had an uncle and a cousin who died by suicide. I had a cousin who was murdered outside of Central Park in New York City. I lost my brother when he was 26 in 1978. So my experience, and with uncles and grandparents and great uncles and things, my experience, it's always been there. And when I worked in a retirement community, it became even more real. As a matter of fact, I was on the ethics committee, and we had a case where a resident in nursing, extreme dementia, could no longer communicate anything, had a problem with her foot. The doctor recommended foot baths and antibiotics. The daughter, who was her legal agent, said, no, that's not quality of life for my mother. And the advance directive that we have written says quality of life. The problem was that advance directive was written in another state. And quality of life was not recognized in the state of Pennsylvania. So the whole thing ended up in court. And the resident was given 2 surrogates. The first surrogate would allow for the baths and the antibiotics. The second surrogate, which was her daughter, would allow for an absolute no to an amputation of the foot. So my father's elderly, and I'm sitting there thinking, what do we have on Dad? We don't have an advance directive. I'd never heard of anything like that before. So I picked up the phone and I called him and I explained what an advance directive was. And I said, if I find us an attorney and I come back to my hometown, will you go with me so that we can get this done? And he said, okay. So it really started with Dad and I through the nursing home connection. In that same retirement community, several years later, one of our managers came back with a document from a convention that she went to, and she was so excited about it. You guys need to see this. This is the greatest thing on earth, And I said, well, can I take it back to my office? And she said, sure. She said, make sure to give it back to me. I said, of course. Well, it lay on my messy desk until I decided one Friday night to clean. I got the document out. I looked at it. I couldn't put it down. It was an advanced directive on heart, on steroids. It asked all kinds of questions that the attorney-driven one just didn't ask. How comfortable do you want to be? What do you want your children to know? How do you want to be remembered? What kind of a funeral do you want to have? Do you want to be cremated or do you want to be buried? And all of these really intimate questions, Dad and I had never talked about it.
Yeah, of course.
So On I called Dad and said I'd like to come home for a while. I got in the car, drove 6.5 hours to the other side of the state, kind of shaking because my dad could be a little gruff. You know, yeah, introducing one more thing to him and he could be off. But the but Grace was with me because when I walked into the hospital room, which is where he was, I said, I have something I'd really like to go over with you. And it's like the advance directive that we did. How are you? And what he did was he shifted his legs over the side of the bed, patted the seat beside me, and said, come on and sit down. It
Wow.
was warm where his legs had been. So we're seated, and there that tray table is in front of us. And question by question by question, I went through the document with Dad. If there were things that he agreed to, we left them standing. If there was something that he didn't agree to, we crossed it out. One of the things he said was, well, you know how they stand up at funerals and they talk about you? I don't want that. If people haven't talked to me to my face and told me nice things, then don't stand up at my funeral and do it. The other thing that he wanted crossed out was, no, I don't want my body parts given away. They're so old. I mean, nobody would ever want them. They're no good to anybody. So, for the most part, he really agreed to everything that was written. He said, I want to be comfortable. If that means giving me a lot of pain medication, I want that.
Load me
He
up.
knew, yeah. He said, I know that that might shorten my life, but at that point, who cares? He said to me, if they're working on me and they can't guarantee 75% quality of life, I want to go. So that's the story that was in the first book. The second book, Dying with Dad, people I thought were going to be really interested in Flying with Dad, the World War II history, but they weren't. Well, they were.
They were.
But they were more interested in how I managed to do these things with my dad. Wasn't I scared? Didn't didn't I want my dad to stay alive? You know, where did I find the courage? Well, when Dad called me, he'd been in the hospital again. This was a couple years later. He said to me, Yvonne, come home. Can you stay for a while? And I said, I'll be there. So the following morning, 6.5 hours back across the state, in 2.5 hours after I got to my childhood home, he was gone.
Wow.
He had fallen out of bed. He was non-responsive. I'm not a nurse. I called the EMTs. They were working on him. I asked them to stop. They said they couldn't. I called the hospital and said, there's a do not resuscitate order on Dad's chart. Please get it to the emergency room. They're bringing him in. Grace again, this grace-filled moment. The emergency room doctor called the EMTs and said, you can stop working on him.
Wow.
So I laid down beside him, put my arm across his chest, told him that I loved him, told him that he was going to be with my mother, which is where he wanted to be. And I did what was the glue in our family. I said the Lord's Prayer in his ear, and he was gone. It is still one of the most profoundly sacred things I've ever done in my life. He trusted me. He trusted me that I would honor his wish. And by the way, how do you pronounce your first name?
Lunaria.
Lunaria. Okay. So, Lunaria, what Dad wanted was feet first out of his own home. And that would have meant on a gurney being taken out because he had passed away. That's exactly what he got. And the ambulance had the back doors open. They were ready to put Dad's body in because he had to go to the emergency room to be pronounced.
Mhm.
The light is showing on his face. It's northwestern Pennsylvania. The snow's coming down an inch an hour. I looked at my father's face for the first time since this all happened, and there was this soft, sweet smile. And I went, yes!
Yes.
The emergency medical technicians looked at me like I'd lost, any sensibility. But
Mm.
I said to them rather, you've given my dad his wish, feet
Yeah.
first out of his own home. So that's the kind of long and short of my story.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing. I think that, so many of us, well, if you live long enough, all of those around you are going to die. And it is such a topic that I've noticed in myself. And as I was reading your submission to the podcast just yesterday, Yvonne, I realized that, my brother was 28 when he died.
Mm.
And, me being younger than him, I was 27. And I thought, wow, look at that. Like the synergies that come across. And that profoundly changed my life. And I'm curious to hear how it changed yours in just a moment. What I'd love to know from you, because, death is the inevitable, right? It's exactly where we're going. Why do you think so many of us are so avoidant, are so scared, are so held back by this conversation about our own mortality and the mortality of those that we love?
I think the adage is if we don't talk about it, it's not going to happen. You know, it's like I'm a psychotherapist, and I've worked with people who've been through trauma. And they have told me if I don't talk about it, it didn't happen. If I don't talk about it, it'll go away. If I don't
Mm-hmm.
talk about it, it's a non reality. So it's the elephant in the living room. Everybody sees it. You can crawl underneath its belly. You can see the trunk swaying. It's all around you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just too hard to say, hey, there's an elephant in the room. Let's talk about that. What I learned working in a retirement community is the elderly wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
I had an open door policy. I was on the third floor. There were a lot of elderly's rooms on that floor. They would walk past my office and stop in, and often the words out of their mouth after a little bit was, Yvonne, I want to go.
Mm.
And I said, tell me.
Yeah.
And then it would just come. It would just come. I'm tired. I'm tired of being in pain. I miss my loved ones. No one else is around. I don't feel like I have a purpose. All of the kind of things that had been meaningful in their life wasn't there anymore, and they were just
Mm.
ready.
They're just being
So,
alive, right? They were a lot, like I've worked in aged care for many years of my life as well, Yvonne. And, when I looked around, it was often, I'm like, these people are just existing. They're
mhm,
alive, sure, but there's no life. There's, barely the family comes and visits, even if they can. Often, they're on a routine. It's just wake up. You're just on a long line of tasks that need to be done for the day by the staff, which is the position that I was in. And then bedtime and happen again. The joy, the life, the laughter, the love. As much as the staff would attempt to bring that, it was a production line. So, from a psychotherapist point of view, with all that history that you've got in session and with your experience of death, what is it? We talked, okay, the elephant in the room. We don't want to deal with it, considering it's the only guarantee. They say death and taxes, but there are plenty of places where you can avoid tax, right? You can't avoid death. So, what do you think from a psychotherapist point of view, and maybe even from a personal one? What do you think is is it fear? Is it doubt? Is it avoidance? What do you think it is? Why don't we want to talk about it?
I think it's all of those things. It's
Mm.
fear, it's avoidance, it's Sometimes I use this analogy. Clients will stay in a non productive pattern,
Mm.
and it's like they're wearing their oldest, scruffiest, most worn out pair of jeans, but they're the most comfortable ones they have. It's familiar. Okay.
Yeah.
It's really familiar. And the same thing I think is true here. Um, there's a familiarity with being alive. Now, I'm a person of faith, so I believe there's something coming after.
Yeah.
I believe there's something coming after. For people, my husband's father was not a person of faith,
Mm.
and I think he really held on because of the fear of letting go, because he didn't think that there might be something coming. So I think depending on where we are, I think our culture, our society, um, our faith constructs, all of that can make it harder for us to really face the inevitable.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, Yvonne. I feel into that. I mean, in life in general, how often you talk about those genes, you talk about that comfortable pattern that may not be very good for us. Be that I go to bed late and I wake up late every day, or I eat the junk food, or am not doing the study that I know that I want to do, or any areas of our life that, obviously this podcast is about being able to create the life of your dreams and what it takes to live a life on purpose for you, the way that you really want to, a life by design. That requires us to take off those jeans that are the comfort jeans and put on maybe some shorts, and our legs might be a bit cold in the winter. So that letting go of the old. Do you have any tips or guidance or advice for anybody who knows they need to let go of those jeans, who knows that they need to change it up, but is feeling quite very, very attached, would I say, Yvonne, to those jeans?
When you said that, sometimes I just get these pictures in my head.
Yeah.
And what I was picturing is a baby learning to walk. And a baby doesn't just stand up and go, vroom. It's small steps. And they wiggle with balance, and they sometimes end up on their bum. But
More often than not in the beginning.
yeah, more often than not in the beginning. So, what is it that you want to do? What are the steps that you need to take? And I believe I was also a classroom teacher. I believe in writing things down. Okay, so if this is somewhere you want to go, what do you need to do first? What do you need to do second? Write it down and take the small step of doing number one until you're really comfortable.
Mm.
When it feels like the number one thing that you put down there is just something that you now can do easily, and then slip into number two. I think to go and say I'm going to change my life full force,
Mm.
that's what's really scary. So creating that idea of what are the small steps along the way.
I love this so much. I think that what I'm hearing is that we all hear about the comfort zone. We've got you've got to get out of your comfort zone. But what often people do is go into the danger zone. They stretch themselves so far. They go from step 0 to step 10, and it's far too far out of their comfort zone that they end up, retracting. They end up coming back to their comfort zone. That was too hard. I'm not doing that again. What I'm
Right.
hearing you say is move into that safety zone. Let's just do that first step on repeat and fall on your bum, fall on your backside time and time again, like the baby might, until you know how to do that one. And as soon as that starts to become part of the comfort zone, you've now stretched that comfort zone and you
Hmm.
can take the next step. But don't attempt to take step 10 or even step 5 until you have gotten really comfortable with the first few steps.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's something really profound in that, and I think that many of the listeners will get an incredible amount of value out of that. Is that for you? Is that how that was for you when you were traveling Europe in the VW bug? Like you're from America, right? You were in you. It was you were in your 20s. When did you do that? You spent a
I
summer traveling through
was
Europe
I was
in a
21.
VW bug.
I
Okay,
was
there
I
you
was
go.
21. Um, One of the things that made it easier is that I wasn't doing it alone. There was another person who
Mm,
really wanted to do it with me. And so that created a comfort zone for me, you know. Um, Actually, there is an organization, an automobile association here in the United States, and we went in, Carol and I went in, and we sat down and talked to the man about, he literally created for us a roadmap. All right, if we were going to
wow.
go to Europe and we were going to do this thing, this is the way we would go. And he said to me, he said, Yvonne, do you have a car? I said, no, I don't own a car right now. And he said, why don't you think about buying a car and picking it up overseas? He said, that way you don't have to rent the car. And I mean, I thought that was a good idea. You know, I could ship it back home. He said, the value is when you ship it back home, it's used. So the taxes aren't so much. All right.
Wow.
Yeah. So it just, if we were going to go and if we were going to rent a car and do this thing, well, why not do that? So that's how it started. But back when I was doing this, there was also a book called Europe on $5 a Day. And all these little clues about staying in youth hostels and how to find the train and how to accomplish a meal and all this. There were lots of suggestions. So we had that book. So we had a map. We had a book on Europe on $5 a day. And we did it.
Mm.
7,200 miles over a summer. And then, of all things, by that time, I was pretty comfortable. The girl I was with, our agreement was she would pay for the gas. She would pay for all of the gas up to what she would have paid for her share of the rental of the car.
Fair enough.
Yep, fair enough. Lo and behold, the last thing we have to do is put the car on a ferry back to England to take it to the shipper to ship it home. So I was driving on the wrong side of the road for me, and
Yep.
she was my
Yep.
sight. So here we did baby steps. You know, we really
Mm.
did baby steps. And the more that we did, the more comfortable we got being on our own and knowing the ropes and knowing how to find. There were nights that we pulled into a campground. We took all of the luggage out of the VW, slid it underneath so if it rained, it wouldn't get wet. I slept in the back seat, all curled up.
Mm.
She slept in the passenger seat with the back down. And then when we were tired of doing that, we'd say, okay, now it's time to spend money. A hot
Yeah.
shower, a clean bed, a good night's sleep.
Mm.
So that's how we ventured through Europe when I was 21.
Yeah. And there's so much value in that story because what I hear from what you're saying is that the roadmap, knowing where you're going or knowing some kind of plan, and it doesn't have to be exactly every single stop you're going to make. Obviously, there were times where you pulled over to the side of the road. Sometimes you're in a hostel, sometimes you weren't. But it's like have a bit of an idea, have a guide, have this roadmap of where you want to go. Because if you just point and shoot, for most people, it's too uncertain. That's the
Mm-hmm.
reality. Look, there are exceptions to that rule. Some people love it. Some people love just getting in a car and not having any idea where to go. And that feels really adventurous. And I don't think that that's a truth for most people. I think the truth for most people, certainly anyone who's, suffered with self-doubt or low self-esteem or anything like that, is that you need the certainty. And that doesn't mean that everything has to be dot point. But what I'm hearing you say is you've got a roadmap, you got some advice from someone that you trusted,
Hmm.
and in a lot of ways there you had a guide. You had the guidebook, and you took the advice from the VW guy, like to take that advice. I think that speaks to so many areas of our life. How do you think that that applies to things in your life moving forward, becoming a psychotherapist, being, a classroom teacher? How do you think that that almost a model there, Yvonne, of getting advice, taking the advice, taking courageous steps, and then just having a guide and a roadmap and then just going for it?
I'll go to when I first started to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this very frequently. One of the things I learned in teaching, and probably I was comfortable in this even prior to that teaching job, I know when I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
really comfortable saying, I don't have a clue. But I do know I had a mother who actually, now that I think of it, she was my role model in that if I ever didn't know something, even when I was teeny tiny, off we'd go to the library
Wow.
and she would help me find a book that would speak to something that I wanted to know more about. Or, learning how to use a card catalog. Many of your listeners may not even have a clue what that is because you can Google, right? You can Google stuff. But all along the way, being supported by mom, by the school that I attended, of ways to find out when you didn't know.
Yeah.
And then when I became a teacher, I couldn't, I can't tell you how many times a day kids would say to me, well, Miss Caputo, how do you do this? Or Miss Caputo, what do you think about that? Or Miss Caputo, da 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 da. And I would have to say, I don't know. But let's find out. Where do we
Yeah.
go to find out? So I think that's something. There are a lot of folks who really struggle with that. They want to appear like they know. They want to appear like they have the edge. They want to appear that way. And that's, for me as a therapist, that's a self-esteem issue.
Yeah.
That's under not having a good self-esteem. But being very comfortable saying, I don't know, let me find
Because
out.
how can we possibly, I want all the listeners for a moment just to stop and think, how could you possibly know the answer to everything? It's literally impossible to know everything about everything. Even in your craft or even in your work, even in one specific thing. I'm just pulling up a hairband that I have here. It could be pretty impossible to know. I mean, maybe a hairband, you could know everything there is to know about that, but you're having to know about the fibers. You're having to learn about elastic. You're having to learn about, I guess there's some physics in that of how that works and time under tension and all. Like, there's a lot to know about just something as simple as a hairband. How can we begin to think that we possibly are going to know the answers to things? And what I love about what you're saying here is it's not about having the resources, it's about being resourceful
Hmm.
so that you can go access them. Cool. Well, I grew up in library days as well. We didn't have the internet free flowing like we do now. You would just go find it. You would go to the library. You would ask people as well. I also traveled Europe in my 20s on a book called Europe on a Shoestring. So
Okay.
similar kind of vibe. Look at our overlapping lives here, Yvonne, without ever having met before. And that's exactly what it was. It was a guidebook that told me, go to this place, ask, and it was by then it was go to the internet cafe and you paid €1 for 5 minutes or whatever it was. But we're in 2024 now. And when someone says to me, "Oh, I can't afford it," or "I don't know how to," or "I can't really get help," especially for their well-being and their mental
Mhm.
well-being, I say to them, there's an there's 24 hours worth of video footage gets loaded into YouTube every hour. There is now, all of that's not going to be helpful, right? But
Mhm.
there is an abundance. Even if you do not have money, there's an abundance of resources at your fingertips right at this very moment. Be that YouTube, be that internet, be that Chat GPT or the local library, because I presume it's still the same in the US for you, Yvonne. Libraries still exist and they're still free. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And the same here.
the local library, which is maybe 2 miles from here,
Hmm.
computers,
Exactly.
stations where you can sit down and log in and find out. It's,
Hmm.
it is that, it is that. And I think the other piece of it, thinking about my childhood, is the way my parents handled when I made a mistake.
Tell me more.
Yeah. Um, what did you learn? What would you do differently next time? Um, yeah, there was oftentimes punishment because there was right and wrong, and mom and dad wanted us to do right.
Consequences.
Yeah, consequences.
Mhm.
But it was always, what can you learn from that? Or, I went through a really, really hard time, and one of my dear, very dear friends said to me, "Hon, you just made a mistake.
Yeah.
You just made a mistake." And how do you need to, having made that mistake, how do you need to move forward?
Mm. How would you teach someone, you've got a client in front of you or, a loved one in those moments, because even for myself, Yvonne, that perfectionism quality of I have to get it right, I have to know all the answers, can't get it wrong. How do we even begin to be okay with the mistakes that we've made?
Well, if I'm in the classroom and I'm dealing with a student, one of the things as a role model is I'm not going to go to heck in a handbasket because they made a mistake. I'm not going
Good start.
I'm not going to yell, I'm not going to scream, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to put them down. One of the things I'll say, um, that I did learn in opposite from my parents is, you should have known better. That
Right.
was a statement that I pulled out of my speech, because how are they supposed to know better?
Never.
If it's a, so one thing is for parents or teachers, who the people who are role models, how do you react when a mistake is made?
Mm.
And then what I found working with students, depending on their age and their level, was to bring it up in such a way that I didn't have the monkey on my back. I wanted to put the
Okay.
monkey where the monkey needed to be. And that's an old time saying. So I would say, I just observed you doing something. What did I see? Oh, you didn't see me doing anything. Yes, I did. What did I see? And
You're giving them the
knowing that I
opportunity to
can,
come forward and say,
yeah,
say what they
knowing
did.
I
Yeah.
can outlast, but eventually I did have this happen, During our talk today, there was something going on, and I watched you doing something.
Mhm.
Um, and the other kids weren't quite happy with it. What were you doing? Nothing. I saw it. What did I see? Nothing.
Mhm.
Well, we can sit here for as long as you'd like, but I'm going to ask the question until I get an answer. What were you doing? I was picking my nose. I
Mm.
said, and how did the kids react to you doing that? He said, they don't like it. Okay. So, one of the things you and I've talked about is that you want the kids to like you. That's one of the things we're going to work on, right? So, what does the situation tell you? He said, I can't pick my nose in front of the other kids. I said, yeah, that's what it tells you. So asking open-ended questions, as a parent, as a therapist, as a teacher, was just something that I found that I could use successfully. Because what I want in those situations is I want the person to think about what needs to change. And it needs to come from them. If it comes from me, then it's still my problem.
Yeah. Ah, that's what you meant by the monkey. So
Yeah.
so if the monkey's on your back, then it's your problem that because you have a problem with their behavior. But if they highlight that their their behavior is not in alignment with who they say they want to be,
Mm-hmm.
then they're the ones they've got the monkey now, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. Yeah. And so how do you think we might do that for ourselves? If, there's a listener right now who's sitting there going, well, I'd like to figure that out for me. I'd like, if I don't have a therapist or a mentor or a parent, because maybe I'm an adult in this case, how do you think that we could go ahead to empower ourselves to have a better conversation with ourselves after a mistake?
I'm going to say something that your listeners might find very, very strange.
Fabulous.
Negative emotions are your best friends.
Amen.
Negative emotions are your best friends. I do a
Tell us
training.
why.
Okay. I do a training around stress management. And I ask people in my training to envision a stop sign. And will you play along with me? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. When you're in your car and you're driving and you see a stop sign ahead, what do?
I would start to slow down, knowing that there's an intersection coming, to prepare to come to a complete stop.
Okay, so you're going to slow down. Great. All right, so that's the first thing to do is to slow down. What's the next thing you're going to do?
Well, in Australia, I would look to my left and look to my right because that's the way the traffic is going to come. Once I've stopped, well, I suppose first thing is to slow down. Then I would stop at the stop sign, and then I look to my left and right to see if there's any traffic coming.
And what's the reason that you look left and right?
Because I need to make sure that it's safe. I need to ascertain whether or not there is any oncoming cars, and I need to give way to them.
Okay, so I say the same thing about negative emotions. So if I'm triggered and I'm angry, stop.
Stop. Right.
What's making me angry? And then how do I need to proceed through the intersection being angry safely? And another way I look at this is if I'm angry, what's making me angry? And how do I need to handle my anger given my values? If I'm anxious, what do I need to do to handle my anxiety given my values? You can do that with any negative emotion. And
So shame comes up from picking my nose, for example.
Mhm.
I've got shame around that. So that is telling me to slow down and then to stop. Is that right?
Mhm.
Okay. Yep.
So you said something earlier in our conversation about going right through, and not thinking about where you're going and what you're doing, instead of taking those baby steps. It was around that
Yep.
conversation. So if we think of negative emotions as a stop signs and our best friends, my best friend is going to tell me, Yvonne, that's not a good idea. Think about the consequences. If I'm really, really angry and I think about something vengeful or revenge, or if I think about something that's passive aggressive, where I'm not respecting myself and not respecting the other person, I'm not living according to my values. So my best friend is going to say to me, "Hey, so this is all internal stuff that we can do. I think that negative emotions are God's way of asking us to stop at the stop sign.
Yeah.
Designed not to be
Mm.
repressed, not to be pushed under, not any of those kinds of things. God wanted us to have a way to think through something so that we could live according to our values.
Yes. Yeah. Is that, I'm curious to know for you to live life on your terms, to live your life by design. What do you think that it takes? What do we need in order to have a life that is by design? Is that part of having, living in alignment with our values, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about death again. All right. So for me
Yeah.
personally, when I close my eyes for the final time, I want to be able to say it was good, that I learned, that I mattered, and that I mattered to people. That along the way, my life meant something for somebody else. Well, I've chosen service work, right? A teacher and a psychotherapist, and then a human resource officer in the
Yeah. And a
retirement
writer.
community.
Let's not factor, two times writer with inspiring stories to help people to, become more comfortable with their own mortality and their own and that of those loved ones as well. Yep.
Absolutely.
So a life of service for you.
A life of service. That my life
Mm.
mattered. I'll go back to my parents. When I was writing the first book about my father, Flying with Dad, when I asked him, doing the 5 wishes, how do you want to be remembered, Dad? He said, my work with the Red Cross. I was flummoxed. I said, well, what about being in World War II? He said, well, that too. But it was that too is like kind of being minor in comparison.
Mm.
So the book went through 4 drafts before it was published. And,
Yep.
and along about the second draft, I thought, Dad said that. I don't know anything about what he meant.
Mm.
So I went back to the town where all of the records were for the Red Cross for my hometown and did some research and found that my father belonged to the Red Cross as a volunteer and as a president for 41 years.
Look at that.
41 years. So there's my dad. My mom was Grandma Teddy. When she retired, she would go into the classroom and she would listen to kids read and she would help them with their homework. And she did Meals on Wheels. And her crowning glory was she taught someone to read.
Mm.
And the person who wanted to learn to read wanted to learn to read so that she could read the Bible.
Wow.
So I grew up in an atmosphere of service.
Yeah. You mentioned the 5 wishes just now, and do you have them off the top of your head? One of them, like you said, how do you want to be remembered? You said something about the 5 wishes. What are they? Are they from the first book?
The 5 wishes are in the first book and they're in the second book. It would take me a while on the computer. What I'd say to your audience is 5wishes.org,
Ah, gotcha.
www.5wishes.org,
Yep.
and they'll be able to find it. Now, I do know that in 42 states in the United States, it's a legal document. I do know that it is legal in some countries. I don't know what countries
Mm.
it's legal in.
Ah, so the 5 wishes is that advanced care planning. That's what you were referring to.
It's a booklet,
Ah, gotcha.
and here
Gotcha,
in the
gotcha. Yeah, I've just jumped on the website now. Mm.
it's
I
a
thought that
booklet.
they may have been speaking to Yvonne to some questions that maybe you had asked your dad, and because the how do you want to be remembered is, I think, a really powerful question for people.
Yeah,
So I really love, and that obviously led you to having so many more, uh, you know, questions and got you to discover more about his life. If you were to, Yvonne, yeah, actually, firstly, before I ask that question, as we kind of come up to the wrap of this conversation, you've written a couple of books. The first book was Flying with Dad, and that's the story of, how you discover that, Dad started talking about his World War II experience and how he was a pilot,
He was a
I presume,
navigator.
with the Flying with Dad.
He was a
A
navigator.
navigator. Yeah. And so that was that unpacking of the story. And then obviously Dying with Dad. And I love I love the symmetry there, right? The flying with Dad, the dying with Dad. Obviously that's a story of how you blessedly let him go into the world and back into heaven for you. How do people find those books? How do we find more about your work? How do we work with you if we want to?
Online booksellers.
Great.
I'm not sure about Australia, but here in the United States, if folks like going to independent bookstores, they can go into the independent bookstore and ask for it to be ordered.
Right.
So I would lean on you in terms of how that might happen where you are.
Fabulous. Fabulous. I love that. So, Flying with Dad, Dying with Dad, they've got subtitles. Yvonne Caputo is the author. So, just Google that. As we say, as we talked before about being resourceful, be resourceful. Go find these books. Any links to your work and stuff, I'll pop in the show notes as well. Is there anywhere specifically online you'd like people to be directed towards, Yvonne?
All right. My publisher is Ingenium Books. So if you Google Ingenium Books, Yvonne Caputo, it will take you right to the website where you'll see both books and get an idea of who I am and all that kind of stuff. To get in touch with me, the easiest way is email, and it's fairly simple.
Right.
It's all lowercase, Yvonne, Yvonne, author, AUTHOR, 4, the number 4, at gmail.com. So lowercase,
Fabulous.
Yvonne, author 4, at gmail.com.
That's fantastic. And we're going to put the link to your Ingenium Books profile as well as your LinkedIn in the show notes. Before we do finish up for today, if you could describe living life on your terms by design in just 5 words, Yvonne, what would they be?
It's a little more than 5. If life
I'm
hands
happy.
you
I'll pay it.
okay. If life hands you lemons, make lemonade.
Fabulous. And that speaks to the resourcefulness that we've been speaking about, right? Like, and everything that you've just, I think it's captured so much of today's conversation. Life is going to throw you lemons. So you better learn how to make lemonade and lemon tart and lemon curd. Learn how to make the best of the circumstance of your life rather than complain about having lemons. Well, lemons are quite delicious and very good for you. So take the medicine. Yvonne, thank you so much for being here on the More Confidence with Luna Gaia podcast. This is our special series of How'd You Get So Lucky, where we interview people on how they are living a life by design, a life on purpose. My brand new book has also just come out, Get Happy and Free, Amazon international bestseller here. If you want any access to that, just go ahead and Google my name. Everything's going to be in the show notes. Give us a like, subscribe, a follow. Everybody says that. I know that they do. The reality of the situation is I get to have more incredible guests. I get to serve you, the audience, more and more through you pressing that button. So if you press the click, you're not just doing it because I want to feel popular. You're doing it because what it actually does algorithmically is share it out to the world. And this is a message. This is a conversation about empowerment, about growth, about being the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And here on the More Confidence with Luna Gaia podcast, this is what we teach you how to do. So, Yvonne, thank you for being here on this conversation. It's been an absolute honor.
You're more than welcome. It was a treat.
Thank you so much for listening to the More Confidence with Luna Gaia podcast. I hope you feel more confident, more self-assured, and ready to go tackle the world's problems and maybe kick ass in some of your dreams. If you haven't already, I would love for you to like and subscribe, follow, and maybe leave a review so that other people know how to find this awesome podcast too. If you're wanting to sink your teeth into something even more juicy, my #1 best-selling book, Perfectly Imperfect, Your Complete Guide to Loving Yourself and Loving Your Body, is now available on all good bookstore sites, both in print, digital, and I narrated it for Audible as well. If you think that coaching or maybe one of my courses is for you, why not head to www.moreconfidence.com.au and get in touch and see if we can talk. And of course, you can find me all across the social medias. That's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, which is where you're probably listening now, or maybe even here on the podcast platform. Sending you big love and wishing you a beautiful day.